letters that danced on the page, numbers that flipped and twisted until they made no sense. 13 years of being told he was behind, struggling, learning disabled. But when Noah Rodriguez sat down at the piano on the America's Got Talent stage and began to translate the infinite complexity of mathematics into music, Simon Cowell realized he wasn't watching a disabled child overcome limitations. He was watching a genius finally find a language the world could understand. What Noah did in the next 20 minutes would challenge everything educators thought they knew about learning, everything society assumed about intelligence, and everything anyone believed about the relationship between struggle and brilliance. When his fingers began dancing across the keys, turning pi into melody and DNA sequences into symphonies, it became clear that the boy everyone had written off wasn't learning disabled. He was learning different, and that difference was about to change everything. Let me take you back to the moment before Noah Rodriguez proved that genius doesn't always come in the package we expect. It was Tuesday evening at the Dolby Theater in Los Angeles, and America's Got Talent was in the middle of its most intellectually surprising season yet. The familiar energy buzzed through the venue, 3,400 audience members filling the red velvet seats, many of them families with children who had learning differences, drawn by Noah's story that had already begun circulating on social media. Simon Cowell sat at the judges' table in his signature black t-shirt and perfectly tailored blazer, but tonight his expression carried more curiosity than usual. The producers had briefed him about this particular contestant, and he wasn't sure what to expect from a 13-year-old who reportedly couldn't read at a third-grade level, but claimed to have discovered mathematical patterns that university professors were still trying to understand. Sofia Vergara was reviewing her notes with unusual interest, having been told that tonight's performance would be unlike anything they'd seen before. Heidi Klum and Howie Mandel were both intrigued by the mystery of how someone with severe learning disabilities could possibly perform on a show that required such precise execution. Terry Crews had spent extra time preparing for this introduction, understanding that the story behind the performance was as important as the performance itself. Backstage, Noah Rodriguez sat cross-legged on the floor, his mother Carmen beside him, both of them surrounded by notebooks, filled with what looked like chaos to most people, but was actually the most sophisticated mathematical art either of them had ever seen. "How are you feeling, mijo?" Carmen asked, watching her son's fingers trace patterns in the air, a habit he'd developed when his mind was working through complex problems that his hands couldn't write down fast enough. "The numbers are singing today, Mama," Noah replied, his voice carrying the slight hesitation that came from years of being told his words didn't matter as much as other children's. "They want to come out and play." Carmen's heart swelled with pride and broke a little at the same time. For 13 years, she had watched her brilliant, creative, extraordinary son be reduced to test scores and deficit labels by an education system that had no idea how to recognize the kind of intelligence he possessed. Noah's journey had been long and frustrating. Diagnosed with severe dyslexia and dyscalculia at age 6, he had spent years in special education programs that focused on what he couldn't do rather than discovering what he could do brilliantly. Reading was torture. Letters flipped and swirled until words became meaningless. Math was agony. Numbers refused to stay in the right order. Simple addition problems became impossible puzzles. But Carmen had noticed something that his teachers missed. When Noah was frustrated by homework, he would go to the old upright piano in their living room and play. Not songs he'd learned, but patterns that seemed to come from somewhere deep inside him. The music he created was complex, mathematical, beautiful in ways that seemed to bypass traditional music theory entirely. "Noah sees mathematics," his piano teacher had told Carmen after the first few lessons, "not the way we teach it in school, but the way it actually exists in the universe. He's not playing music, he's translating cosmic patterns into sound." That's when Carmen began to understand that her son wasn't learning disabled. He was learning in a way that the world hadn't figured out how to teach yet. "Noah Rodriguez," called Maria, one of the production assistants. "You're on in 2 minutes." Noah stood up, adjusting the bright blue shirt that Carmen had bought specially for this day. It was his favorite color, the color of the mathematical equations he saw floating in his mind when he was working through particularly beautiful problems. "Remember," Carmen said, kneeling down to look her son in the eyes, "you're not here to prove you're not disabled. You're here to show them that different kinds of minds create different kinds of magic." Noah nodded, his expression becoming more focused. "I'm going to show them that math isn't numbers on paper, Mama. Math is music. Math is art. Math is everywhere, and I can see it." The performance Noah had planned was ambitious beyond anything attempted on AGT before. He intended to take the audience on a journey through some of the most beautiful mathematical concepts in existence, translating each one into music that would make the invisible patterns of the universe audible to human ears. He would start with pi, those infinite decimal places that most people saw as random numbers, but that Noah experienced as a melody that told the story of circles and infinity. Then he would move to the Fibonacci sequence, the golden ratio, prime number distributions, and finally DNA, sequencing patterns that he had been studying with geneticists who were amazed by his ability to see musical patterns in genetic code. "Ready?" Carmen asked, standing up to embrace her son. "I've been ready my whole life," Noah replied, with a confidence that seemed impossible from someone who had spent 13 years being told he was academically behind. "Today they finally get to hear what I've been trying to tell them." Terry Crew's voice boomed across the theater. "Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome Noah Rodriguez." The curtain rose and Noah walked onto the stage. The audience's first impression was of a typical 13-year-old boy, a little nervous, a little excited, clearly eager to show what he could do, but there was something in Noah's eyes that suggested depths that weren't immediately apparent, an intelligence that operated on frequencies most people couldn't detect. Simon leaned forward, studying Noah with the intensity he usually reserved for contestants who had already proven themselves exceptional. There was something about this kid that commanded attention, something that suggested they were about to witness something unprecedented. "Good evening," Terry said warmly as Noah reached center stage, where a grand piano had been positioned alongside a large LED screen that would display visual elements during his performance. "Good evening, Mr. Cruz," Noah replied, his voice clear despite the slight hesitation that came from years of being interrupted or corrected when he spoke. "What's your name, son?" "My name is Noah Rodriguez, and I'm 13 years old." "And where are you from, Noah?" "I'm from San Antonio, Texas, where my mama teaches 3rd grade and tries to help kids like me who learn differently." Terry smiled at the obvious love in Noah's voice when he mentioned his mother. "So tell us, Noah, what makes you learn differently?" Noah's expression became more serious, more thoughtful. "I have something called dyslexia and dyscalculia, which means my brain sees letters and numbers differently than most people. When I try to read, the words jump around on the page like they're dancing. When I try to do math on paper, the numbers won't stay where I put them." The audience was listening intently, many parents recognizing their own children's struggles in Noah's description. "But I discovered something amazing," Noah continued, his voice gaining strength. "Just because I can't see math the way schools teach it doesn't mean I can't see math at all. I can see mathematical patterns in music, in nature, in everything around us. And tonight, I want to show you what math sounds like when you let it become music." Simon exchanged glances with the other judges. This was definitely not what any of them had expected from a 13-year-old with learning disabilities. "That sounds fascinating, Noah," Terry said. "What exactly are you going to do for us tonight?" Noah walked over to the piano, his fingers already moving in the air as if he were conducting an invisible orchestra. "I'm going to play the mathematics of the universe. I'm going to take numbers that most people think are just random digits and show you that they're actually the most beautiful music ever written." He looked directly at the judges, his expression completely confident despite his earlier hesitation. And I want everyone to understand something important. Just because someone learns differently doesn't mean they're learning less. Sometimes it means they're learning more than anyone realized. All right, Noah, Terry said, stepping back with genuine excitement. Show us what mathematics sounds like. The stage lights dimmed, leaving Noah illuminated at the piano, while the large LED screen behind him came to life. Numbers began flowing across the display, not random digits, but the precise sequence of pi, starting with 3.14159. Noah placed his hands on the keys and began to play. The first notes that emerged from the piano were hauntingly beautiful, but more than that, they followed a pattern that seemed both random and inevitable. As Noah played, the audience began to understand that each note corresponded to a digit of pi, that he was literally translating mathematical infinity into audible form. "This is pi," Noah said as he played, his voice carrying clearly over the music. "Most people think it's just a number, but it's actually a song that goes on forever, just like circles go on forever." Simon's expression was shifting from curiosity to amazement. He was beginning to understand that he wasn't just hearing a clever musical trick, he was witnessing a completely different way of perceiving and expressing mathematical concepts. As Noah continued playing the pi sequence, the melody became more complex, more beautiful. Patterns emerged that seemed impossible, recurring themes that appeared and disappeared like mathematical ghosts, harmonies that suggested deeper structures hidden within the apparent randomness. "The beautiful thing about pi," Noah explained while playing, "is that it never repeats, but it's not random either. There are patterns inside patterns, music inside music. My brain can't do multiplication tables, but it can hear the symphony that lives inside infinite numbers." The audience was completely mesmerized. Parents who had struggled to help their own learning disabled children were seeing a completely new way of understanding intelligence. Mathematics teachers were frantically taking notes, recognizing that they were witnessing a teaching method that could revolutionize how they approached their subject, but it was at the judges' table that the most profound reaction was taking place. Simon Cowell was staring at Noah with an expression of complete awe. This wasn't just talent, this was genius expressing itself in a form that traditional education systems had never learned to recognize or nurture. As Noah finished the pi sequence, the LED screen shifted to display the Fibonacci sequence 1, 1, 2, 3, 5, 8, 13, 21, and Noah's playing evolved to match. "This is the Fibonacci sequence," he explained, his fingers finding a rhythm that seemed to spiral upward like the golden ratio itself. "It's the math that makes seashells and sunflowers and galaxies. It's everywhere in nature. And when you turn it into music, you can hear why the universe is so beautiful." The melody that emerged was unlike anything anyone in the theater had ever heard. It seemed to grow organically, each note building on the previous ones in a way that felt both mathematical and mystical. Sophia was openly crying, not from sadness, but from the sheer beauty of what she was hearing. Heidi was taking notes furiously, clearly recognizing that she was witnessing something that would change how she thought about learning and intelligence. Howie was unusually still, completely absorbed in the mathematical music flowing from the stage. "My teachers used to tell me I was bad at math," Noah said as he played, his voice now completely confident. "But they were wrong. I'm not bad at math. I just speak a different mathematical language, and this is what it sounds like." As the Fibonacci sequence reached its crescendo, Noah transitioned into something even more complex. The LED screen now displayed DNA sequencing data, and Noah began translating genetic code into music. "This is DNA," he announced, his playing becoming more intricate, more layered. "The instructions for all life on Earth, and it has rhythms, patterns, melodies that most people never hear because they're looking at it instead of listening to it." The music that emerged was ethereal, otherworldly, like hearing the soundtrack to evolution itself. The audience was no longer just watching a performance. They were experiencing a completely new way of understanding the intersection between science and art. Simon stood up from his chair, unable to remain seated while witnessing something this extraordinary. He wasn't just watching a 13-year-old play piano. He was watching the future of education, the redefinition of intelligence, the proof that human genius comes in forms that society is only beginning to understand. As Noah's performance built toward its climax, he began combining all the mathematical sequences he had played, weaving pi and Fibonacci and DNA into a symphony that seemed to represent the mathematical foundation of existence itself. "This is what I see when people say I'm learning disabled," Noah said, his voice soaring over the music. "I see the universe singing. I see numbers dancing. I see patterns that connect everything to everything else. And maybe I can't read the way other kids can, but I can read the language that God used to write the world." The final chord rang out across the theater, and for a moment, complete silence reigned. Then slowly, the audience began to understand what they had just witnessed. This wasn't just a performance by a learning disabled child who had found a way to cope with his limitations. This was a demonstration by a genius who had been mislabeled by a system that didn't know how to recognize the kind of intelligence he possessed. The applause that followed was unlike anything in AGT history. It wasn't just appreciation for entertainment. It was recognition of a paradigm shift, an understanding that intelligence comes in forms that society is only beginning to recognize. But the most powerful reaction was happening at the judges' table. Simon Cowell was not just clapping, he was staring at Noah with an expression that combined awe, admiration, and something approaching reverence. When he finally spoke, his voice carried an authority that silenced the entire theater. "Noah," he said, and his voice was thick with emotion, "I need everyone in this theater and everyone watching at home to understand what just happened here." Noah stood beside the piano, no longer the hesitant boy who had walked onto the stage, but someone who had just proven that he belonged exactly where he was. What you just did wasn't just music. What you just did was prove that everything we think we know about learning, about intelligence, about what it means to be gifted, it's all wrong. Simon stepped closer to the stage, his expression intense with conviction. "You've been labeled learning disabled your entire life. Teachers, test scores, education systems, they've all told you that you're behind, that you can't keep up, that you need special help. But what you just showed us is that you're not behind, you're ahead. You're so far ahead that the rest of us are still trying to catch up." The audience was hanging on every word, understanding that Simon was articulating something profound about how society recognizes and nurtures different kinds of genius. "Noah, you don't have a learning disability. You have a learning difference, and that difference allows you to see patterns, to make connections, to understand relationships between concepts that the rest of us miss completely." Simon turned to address the audience directly. How many kids like Noah are sitting in special education classrooms right now, being told they're not smart enough, when actually they're brilliant in ways we don't know how to measure? How many mathematical geniuses, artistic prodigies, scientific innovators are we losing because they don't fit our narrow definition of intelligence? He looked back at Noah, and what he said next would be quoted in education journals and policy discussions for years to come. "Noah Rodriguez, you didn't just perform for us tonight. You educated us. You showed us that genius doesn't always come with perfect test scores and grade point averages. Sometimes it comes with different ways of seeing, different ways of understanding, different ways of expressing the incredible complexity of human intelligence." Simon walked to his golden buzzer, but then he paused. "Actually," he said, turning to his fellow judges, "what Noah just demonstrated, this complete redefinition of what learning and intelligence can look like, doesn't that deserve recognition from all of us?" Without hesitation, Sophia, Heidi, and Howie stood up and joined Simon at their golden buzzers. "Noah Rodriguez," Simon announced, his voice carrying across the theater, "you have just received the first ever Educational Excellence Golden Buzzer because you didn't just entertain us tonight, you taught us something that could change how we educate children forever." All four judges pressed their buzzers simultaneously. Golden confetti exploded from the ceiling, but this time it felt different. This wasn't just celebration, this was revolution. It was the moment when learning disabilities became learning differences, when educational failure became recognition of unrecognized genius. Through all the falling gold, the cameras captured the moment that would be replayed in education conferences worldwide. Noah standing beside the piano that had allowed him to translate his mathematical vision into language the world could finally understand, surrounded by the evidence that intelligence comes in forms that society is only beginning to recognize. Terry Crews ran onto the stage with tears in his eyes. Ladies and gentlemen, Noah Rodriguez, redefining genius one mathematical symphony at a time. But perhaps the most meaningful moment came when Carmen was brought onto the stage and embraced her son, while Simon watched with deep satisfaction. You were right, mijo, Carmen whispered. The numbers were singing today. They're always singing, Mama, Noah replied. Now everyone else can finally hear them, too. 3 months later, Noah Rodriguez won America's Got Talent, becoming the youngest mathematical performer to ever take the title. But more importantly, his victory sparked a global movement to recognize and nurture different types of intelligence in educational systems worldwide. His winning performance was an original composition called the Learning Different Symphony, which became required viewing in education programs and teacher training courses across the country. But the numbers and recognition weren't the real story. The real story was in the thousands of messages Noah received from parents of learning disabled children who said his performance helped them see their kids' struggles as potential strengths. It was in the schools that began incorporating mathematical music into their special education programs. It was in the universities that started developing new ways to identify and nurture non-traditional genius. Simon Cowell, true to his word, became personally involved in Noah's education, connecting him with mathematicians, musicians, and educators who could help him develop his unique gifts. He also established the Noah Rodriguez Institute for Learning Differences, dedicated to identifying and supporting children whose intelligence doesn't fit traditional molds. Noah's story became a case study in educational psychology programs, proving that learning disabilities are often just learning differences that haven't found the right expression. His mathematical music became a therapeutic tool used with other children who struggled with traditional academic approaches. 6 months after his AGT victory, Noah was invited to perform at the International Mathematical Union Conference, where his translation of complex mathematical proofs into musical form helped graduate students understand concepts they had been struggling with for months. During his performance at the Kennedy Center, Noah looked out at an audience that included Nobel Prize winners, university presidents, and education policy makers from around the world. 2 years ago, he told them, my teachers thought I might never learn to read properly. Tonight, I'm here to tell you that maybe the problem wasn't that I couldn't learn. Maybe the problem was that we hadn't figured out how to teach the way my brain learns best. He sat down at the piano and began to play a piece he had composed based on Einstein's theory of relativity, translating space-time equations into a melody that seemed to bend and curve like the universe itself. Every child's brain is different, he said as he played. Every child's intelligence is unique. And maybe instead of trying to make every kid learn the same way, we should be celebrating the fact that different kinds of minds create different kinds of magic. The lesson Noah Rodriguez taught the world that night is revolutionary. Intelligence isn't a single, measurable quality that some people have more of than others. Intelligence is a spectrum of different abilities, different ways of seeing, different methods of understanding and expressing the complexity of human consciousness. Simon Cowell learned that being a judge sometimes means recognizing when someone isn't just performing, they're teaching, challenging, revolutionizing the way society thinks about fundamental questions. And Noah proved that learning disabilities are often just learning differences waiting for the right opportunity to show their genius, that academic failure doesn't mean intellectual poverty, and that sometimes the kids who struggle most with traditional education are the ones with the most to teach us about what education could become. The golden confetti from that night has been swept away, but the golden moment it represented, when a 13-year-old boy who couldn't read turned mathematics into music and revolutionized how the world thinks about learning, that moment continues to inspire educators, support struggling students, and prove that genius doesn't always come in the package we expect. In the end, Noah Rodriguez didn't just overcome a learning disability, he redefined what learning could look like, what intelligence could sound like, and what happens when we stop trying to fix children who learn differently and start celebrating the unique gifts that different kinds of minds bring to the world. Because sometimes the most important lesson isn't about what someone can't do, it's about discovering what they can do brilliantly, beautifully, in ways that no one else has ever imagined possible.